Time to shift gears a bit from my usual video topics. I want to talk about Yes. In all honesty, I'm not really a huge Yes fan anymore. The interpersonal drama has just gotten to be too much, and the ratio of good music to uninspired garbage just gets worse with every new album. Also, I'm just generally more into jazz and electronic music than prog rock these days. But make no mistake, in my lifetime, there is still no band on the planet that I have devoted more mental real estate to than Yes. I was absolutely obsessed with them in high school and college, and I devoured not just their music, but every scrap of pre-internet information I could find about them. A lot of that information came from the 1991 Yes Years documentary, wherein Rick Wakeman presciently said Yes would go on long after everyone currently in it was gone. Steve Howe is the only member of the 8-man Union lineup of 1991 that is still in the band today. There are a lot of YouTube videos ranking the albums of Yes. What more can I possibly add to the conversation? Well, for one thing, I can be pedantic about what does or doesn't count as a studio album. I'm going by the list on their Wikipedia entry, which includes 3 albums most people omit from their lists: Keys to Ascension 1 and 2, and the mini LP From a Page. Well, I'm going to count them. Although I'm lumping both Keys to Ascension albums together since they're both half live, half studio, with about 1 proper album's worth of studio material between them. As for the after-the-fact release of From a Page, that one is almost more of an Oliver Wakeman solo project with members of Yes as the backing band. And it begs the question, what exactly is the difference between an EP and a mini LP? Well, I had honestly never listened to it before compiling this list, but that won't keep me from ranking it. Now, here's where I think my video is going to be unique and hopefully interesting. I'm going to rank the albums from best to worst rather than the other way around. After all, we all know which album is going to be number 1, so I might as well get that part over with. It's the bad albums that are more fun to talk about. But then I'm also going to do a second ranking, Yes cover art. That one I am going to rank worst to best in traditional style. Back in the early days of the web, I'm talking about back when years still started with a 1, I ran a website of Yes album reviews. There was plenty of snark, but also genuine appreciation. The thing about Yes is, they're really hard to take seriously. Sure, they've made some truly transcendent music, but they've also produced some pure rubbish and, well, they're easy to poke fun at. That website, somewhat shockingly, led to an offer from the band's management to design and run the official Yes website, yesworld.com, just as it was getting started. I turned them down. Partly because I didn't want to have to pretend Union was a good album, but mostly because I was only going to be compensated in the form of merch and free meet and greets at concerts. No thanks. But enough about me and my life's missed opportunities. It's time to rip on some Yes albums. Yes albums, ranked best to worst. Number 1, Close to the Edge, 1972. Of course this is number 1. I mean, it's arguably the best, most definitive progressive rock album ever. All of the elements came together perfectly with this album. The range of musical styles, emotional depth, and lyrical, well, whatever Jon Anderson's lyrics are about. Combine that with the most consistently fantastic and virtuosic playing I think we ever got on a Yes album, and there's no doubt that this was their peak. My only criticism of this entire album is the section of And You and I, where the vocal harmonies are run through a Leslie speaker. Ironically, it was a live version from 1987 featuring Trevor Rabin, included on the Yes Years box set, that made me realize just how transcendent those harmonies are, but their impact is lost amid that Leslie warble on the studio original. Number 2, Relayer, 1974. This may be an unexpected number 2, but keep in mind that I like things weird. Prog rock is inherently weird, so why not lean into it? As many others have noted, this was Yes's biggest foray into the realm of jazz fusion. Clearly, they were inspired by what bands like Mahavishnu Orchestra and Return to Forever were up to at the time, and I'm sure Patrick Moraz had an outsized influence on the band going in this direction. I also really like the fact that this album mirrors the 3-song structure of Close to the Edge. Ultimately, I can't help but see this album as the end of the journey of the original adventurous spirit of this band. After the 1975 tour supporting Relayer, the band went on hiatus for a couple of years for each member to release a solo album. When they reunited, bringing Rick Wakeman back into the fold for 1977's Going for the One, it felt like a retreat. That album has a lot of great music. It's arguably their last truly great album, but it feels comparatively safe. With each new album, from the 1969 self-titled debut up through Relayer in 1974, Yes felt like a band that was always pushing itself into uncharted territory. Relayer was the last time they would release any new music that felt that way, with one arguable and somewhat surprising exception. I'll get to that shortly. Number 3, the Yes album, 1971. The first album with Steve Howe was where the classic Yes sound really gelled. It's a snapshot of a very unique point in time for the band. They still had the hungry, youthful energy of a band on the rise, they were overflowing with creative ideas, and the wide range of instrumental colors and techniques Steve Howe brought to the band just pushed it all to the next level. The production on this album is also outstanding. Extremely clear and crisp, but with a lot of punch. Number 4, Fragile, or if you prefer, Fragile, or
Fragile. It must be Italian.
1971. The introduction of Rick Wakeman, hot off some great session work on David Bowie's Hunky Dory album, added yet another layer of depth to the band's sound, and it produced my all-time favorite Yes track, the King Crimson-inspired Heart of the Sunrise. The main weakness of this album is that the band was a bit too rushed by management to release something new with Rick on it, and they didn't have time to write enough full band material for a full album, even though what they did write was top-notch. Roundabout, South Side of the Sky, and Long Distance Runaround are all absolute classics. The 5 solo tracks, on the other hand, are very inconsistent. Steve Howe's Mood for a Day is the obvious standout, but I also like Bill Bruford's bonkers and mercifully brief 5% for Nothing. And even though I've recorded my own cover version of Chris Squire's The Fish, I feel like it and the solo tracks offered by Rick and Jon were just superfluous, and the album would be stronger without them. Number 5, 90125, 1983. I bet this is the first real surprise on the list. How dare I rank a Trevor Rabin album so high? Well, I've got my reasons. First off, Owner of a Lonely Heart was my introduction to this band as a 10-year-old MTV junkie. It was my favorite song at the time. But it's not just about that moment in the 80s. As the years have worn on, and as Steve Howe's diminished playing ability and petty feud with Jon Anderson have soured me on him, I've come to have a greater and greater appreciation for what Trevor Rabin brought to the band. Granted, I don't really feel like anything they produced after this album needs to exist, but it doesn't change the fact that this, overall, is an excellent and innovative collection of early 80s rock. And although it's much more commercial than Relayer, to the point where it scarcely seems like the same band, this is the album I was talking about earlier that feels like their last foray into some uncharted territory. This is Yes doing something completely new and doing it quite well. Number 6, Tales from Topographic Oceans, 1973. This is famously the most divisive album in the band's career. Or is it? I think at this point most fans of the band like it, but only because it takes a certain kind of person to still be a fan of this band in 2025. It definitely was a turning point though, and it's always been striking to me that this was their first studio album with Alan White on drums. By now, he's unquestionably the band's definitive drummer, and since he outlived Chris Squire, he permanently holds the title for the longest tenure in the band. But even though he was a member of Yes for an impressive 50 years, the albums that are generally considered to be their finest work were all recorded during Bill Bruford's brief 4 years as the band's original drummer. That said, even though this album is definitely an acquired taste, I think it's worth listening to. Number 7, Going for the One, 1977. I have mixed feelings about this album, and I'm not talking about the cover art, that will come later. Musically, Going for the One has some truly excellent compositions and performances. Awaken is without a doubt the last epic masterpiece Yes ever made. And yet, right from the beginning, there are signs of trouble, in the form of Steve Howe's strident, ridiculous pedal steel guitar that introduces the title track. While Steve Howe's chops were still as good as ever, this is a clear sign of his faltering musical judgment. Smearing those ugly slides all over this otherwise great song was the aural equivalent of the smashed tomatoes on the cover of the subsequent album, Tornado. Not to be outdone, Rick Wakeman matched Steve Howe's new heights of absurdity by recording his organ part for Parallels on a literal church organ, transmitting his performance over Switzerland's high-fidelity phone lines back to the recording studio. Wait, what? That can't be right. The crazy thing is, it does not make the song better. It only sounds dorky. It would rock way harder on a greasy, overdriven Hammond organ, but that wouldn't be excessive enough. Those missteps aside, this is still an excellent album. Number 8, Yes, 1969. This is where it all began. Would any of the members of this lineup believe that the band would still be recording and touring 56 years later? Well, maybe not, especially considering none of the 5 of them have had anything to do with the band that calls itself Yes since original bassist Chris Squire died a decade ago. And the last time any of the other 4 members were involved was way back in 2004. Still, Yes is an evolving way of making music. and you can follow a thread, a very frayed and tangled thread, from this album straight through to 2023's Mirror to the Sky. Without this album, none of that would exist. The original Yes was both jazzier, thanks to drummer Bill Bruford and guitarist Peter Banks, and more rocking, thanks to organist Tony Kaye, who brought a bit of Vanilla Fudge swagger. But their penchant for complex arrangements and virtuosic performances was there from the start. This album is clearly the beginning of something big, and I really enjoy it. Number 9, Drama, 1980. Can Yes be Yes without Jon Anderson's distinctive voice? This album from 1980 is the first time the question was asked, but it definitely won't be the last. Consider that the primary job qualification for being hired as lead singer of Yes in the 21st century is to have previously performed in a Yes cover band, and I think you have the answer. Still, Trevor Horn and Jeff Downs, who were already an entire band unto themselves as the Buggles, subsumed that identity to become replacements for Jon Anderson and Rick Wakeman, respectively, in this revamped Yes lineup. And it's an interesting artifact of the turning of the decade. 1980s music was, pardon the pun, dramatically different than 1970s music. The time from about 1978 to 1981 provides the connective tissue, with the emergence of new wave bands like the Cars and Duran Duran, and of course the Buggles themselves. The other members of Yes clearly sensed the direction music was heading, and Drama manages to be a weird amalgam of both 70s prog and 80s new wave, and I actually think it works. Yes, purists might want to dismiss this album, but if you approach it with an open mind, the songs on it are actually really good, and the playing is excellent. The production is also much improved from Tornado, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Number 10, Time and a Word, 1970. The band's sophomore album is both more and less than the debut. You can feel the essence of prog rock getting closer with tracks like Astral Traveler. But the pieces are not yet all in place, and I feel like the overall sound is severely harmed by the poorly executed orchestral overdubs. They're especially bad if you listen in headphones and notice the cheesy, abrupt stereo panning effects. Psychedelia produced a lot of interesting things, but these kinds of dated production techniques are not among them. Number 11, Tornado, 1978. Or is that Tormato? So, funny story. Back when I first seriously got into Yes, not just a 10-year-old watching the Owner of a Lonely Heart video on MTV, but a high school nerd with a job bagging groceries and all of my earnings going towards procuring prog rock albums, Yes's then most recent album was 1987's Big Generator. Union was still a couple of years in the future. At that time, Tornado was widely regarded as the worst Yes album. I personally thought it was their second worst. Well, now there are a lot more albums to compare it to. That extra perspective really shows how strong a lot of the material on this album is, especially Future Times Rejoice, Release, On the Silent Wings of Freedom, and the truly beautiful Onward. But there's also the dorky Circus of Heaven and the absolutely wretched Don't Kill the Whale, which fuses a ham-fisted environmental message with a ham-fisted attempt at disco. Still, the album's biggest downfall is the weird production error that resulted in a thin sound, lacking much dynamic punch. All of that said, I'd still gladly have this be the only Yes album I could ever listen to again for the rest of my life, over any of the others that are still to come on this list. Number 12, Big Generator, 1987. Here it is. With this placement, you may notice that my top 12 Yes albums are their first 12 albums. They also happen to be the 12 that already existed when I started seriously listening to the band in high school. Everything that they produced after that personal pivot point is lower on the list. Yes isn't the only band whose existing body of work when I got into them seems timeless and eternal, while all of their newer stuff feels throwaway to me. I'm not sure what it says about my psyche, but I'm sure it says something. It's weird for me to realize that for the band themselves, this is all part of a continuum, and there's no significant historical dividing line, like BC and AD, between Big Generator and what followed. Okay, maybe that's not entirely true, since immediately after Big Generator, Jon Anderson left Yes to form Anderson, Bruford, Wakeman, Howe with 3 other ex-Yes men, essentially creating an alternative version of the band. You may be thinking at this point that I don't really have much to say about Big Generator itself, and that's because I don't. I don't really like it all that much, and I haven't listened to it very many times. I think more than anything, it reveals how much the band's apparent chemistry on 90125 was a carefully constructed illusion. They weren't able to reproduce that magic a second time. That said, this album is mostly fine. I was in middle school when Big Generator came out, and since I had loved Owner of a Lonely Heart in 4th grade, I was eager for some new Yes. This was still before I knew about prog rock or any of the band's 70s albums. I thought Love Will Find a Way was pretty catchy. Nowhere near as good as Owner of a Lonely Heart, but I wouldn't turn it off when it came on the radio or MTV. And the weird music video featuring the band having an Old West campfire sing-along inside an airplane hangar was the kind of bizarre concept that seemed totally normal at the time, but is absolutely baffling in hindsight. Number 13, The Ladder, 1999. To me, this is without a doubt the best album Yes has produced in the post-Rabin era, and is maybe the only one where you can feel that the band actually believed in what they were doing. Although the classic late 70s lineup had reunited briefly to produce the Keys to Ascension projects, Rick Wakeman had already quit, again, and was replaced by a Russian wunderkind, Igor Koroshev, on keys. Billy Sherwood, longtime friend and collaborator of Chris Squire, and previously a session musician and co-writer on a few tracks from 1991's Union, had also been hired as a touring musician, becoming a full member of the band for a few of the late 1990s albums, including this one. Whereas Keys to Ascension felt a bit rushed and half-baked, the band seemed to be firing on all cylinders with this album. I listened to it extensively when it was released in 1999, although it has not endured for me like the band's classic work, and I honestly don't think I've listened to more than a few fragments of it in 20 years. Number 14, Talk, 1994. This is the forgotten album of the Rabin era. After 1991's Union project somehow failed to result in a stable 8-member lineup, Yes reverted to their 80s personnel for one last hurrah in 1994. This album was notable at the time for being one of the first big projects to be produced entirely on a computer, with all of the audio stored not on tape but on hard drives. Trevor Rabin really took charge of this project. The result is kind of strange and out of time. A bit overproduced, but not in the ways you'd expect. The sound is big, of course, but you can just feel how way too much time was put into obsessing over every sound, taking advantage of both the new technological capabilities of digital recording and the limitless time available when working in a home studio. It all comes off a bit stifling. There is some good material here, including a songwriting collaboration with Roger Hodgson of Supertramp, and Trevor Rabin's attempt at producing a true Yes prog epic with the multi-part, 15-minute Endless Dream. But overall, this album stands the test of time about as well as Peter Max's awful new Yes logo on its cover. Number 15, Fly From Here, 2011. I should start by mentioning that there are two versions of this album. It was originally released with Benoit David on lead vocals, but since the title suite started life as an uncompleted project of the 1980 lineup that produced Drama, it was reissued a few years later in a new version, subtitled Return Trip, with Drama-era vocalist and this album's producer, Trevor Horn, on lead vocals. With that change, this album now consists of the same personnel as Drama, and can be seen as the follow-up to their original work. Don't bother with the Benoit David version, not that you can even find it these days. So, is this a worthy successor to Drama? The suite, I think, is very good, except for Steve Howe's goofy, unnecessary, and completely out of left field bumpy ride section in the middle. It reminds me of when I got the Rush album Caress of Steel on cassette in high school. The record label, in their clueless quest to balance out the lengths of the sides of the cassette version, swapped the positions of Didax and Narpitz, and I Think I'm Going Bald. Never mind the fact that Didax and Narpitz was part of a sidelong suite. My cassette version threw I Think I'm Going Bald right into the middle of it. What does that have to do with Yes? Nothing, of course, but it's more interesting than anything on side 2 of this album. Let's move on. Number 16, Mirror to the Sky, 2023. As soon as this album was announced, I was immediately intrigued by the cover art. Roger Dean has been phoning in album covers for Yes ever since Anderson, Bruford, Wakeman, Howe in 1988, with a corresponding amount of effort to what it sounds like the band has put into the record. This, to me, was his most interesting album cover since Relayer. The cover alone made me want to listen to the album, and much to my surprise, I actually liked a lot of it, but it didn't really stick with me, and I haven't listened to it since maybe a couple of weeks after it was released. It's just hard for me to get excited about the work of a Yes cover band, which this pretty much is at this point. And that leads me to this album's immediate predecessor, number 17 on my list. Number 17, The Quest, 2021. Ugh, that synth opening on the first track. Jeff Downes, what are you doing? It's a poor man's imitation of Keith Emerson's interpretation of Aaron Copland's Fanfare for the Common Man, which, honestly, corny as it may be, was way more engaging than anything on this album. That said, the new blood in the band, John Davison, Jay Shellen, and Billy Sherwood, all bring more creative energy, just more energy, period, than anything Steve Howe's been able to muster in decades. Overall, The Quest is actually pretty listenable, with quite a few interesting moments and comparatively little cringe, besides Steve Howe's strained vocals on the Western Edge. Ouch. Still, it's going to get a lot worse from here. I originally compiled this list from memory. I didn't actually sit down and listen to each album with fresh ears because I know most of them so well. This one is an exception because I hadn't ever listened to it in the first place. But I did listen to it in the background as I was writing the script, and I found it surprisingly engaging. That led me to revise the list, moving it up 2 spots. I might even put it above Mirror to the Sky, but then I remembered those vocals on the Western Edge, and honestly, the later songs on the album are kind of plodding and tedious. Also, I have a serious problem with the cover art, but that's for the next list. Number 18, Keys to Ascension 1 and 2, 1996 and 1997. The so-called classic lineup returns. Never mind the fact that this lineup had only produced 3 albums, Tales from Topographic Oceans, Going for the One, and Tornado. Not the trilogy most fans would truly consider the band's pinnacle. It was very exciting in the mid-90s, though, as a then young prog rock fan, to see Steve Howe and Rick Wakeman rejoin Yes. But then all we got out of that lineup in terms of new music was 2 half albums of new material. And some of it isn't even new. It's stuff they had worked on in the 70s and set aside because they didn't think it was good enough at the time. Letting it marinate for 2 decades didn't really make it taste any better. Number 19, Magnification, 2001. I'm never much of a fan of rock albums with a live orchestra. It seems gimmicky, especially when the orchestra is added to make up for the fact that your keyboardist quit and you don't have a replacement. That said, and despite some of my earlier criticisms of Time and a Word, there's a certain charm to some of those violin lines on that album, and the arrangements here are clearly a deliberate nod back to those early days of the band. Let's put this album into its historical context. It was their first album after The Ladder. The reason they didn't have a keyboard player was not because he had quit. Igor Koreshev, who had played on The Ladder and toured with the band extensively for the past few years, had been fired for assaulting 2 female security guards backstage at a concert. Ugh. Also, Magnification was released on September 10th, 2001. No wonder I didn't pay too much attention to it at the time. Number 20, Open Your Eyes, 1997. Cover Your Ears. Number 21, Union, 1991. There's a 2-word album review and a famous scene from This Is Spinal Tap. That's all I'm going to say about Union. Plus, I already used up my one opportunity for a pithy joke review on the last one. Number 22, From a Page. Recorded 2010, released 2019. First off, come on. A mini LP isn't a thing. This is an EP. Ignoring bonus edits and live tracks, it's only 4 songs, roughly 26 minutes in total. From a Page shouldn't be on this list at all, but Wikipedia lists it among the band's studio albums, so I'm going to count it. Honestly, I had never listened to more than a few seconds of it before I forced myself to listen to the whole thing in preparation for this video. I was struck by how strong To the Moment is. Yeah, it relies way too much on Oliver Wakeman imitating his dad with Hammond organ and Minimoog, but it's actually a pretty good song, with a kind of mysterious, atmospheric verse, a soaring chorus, and excellent playing and singing. This song deserved to exist somewhere other than on this odd artifact most people like me probably overlooked. As for the rest of these songs, Words on a Page almost sounds like it could fit on Going for the One, but there's some weirdness in the production, especially on the bass and drums. Benoit David's voice sounds weird, and overall it's just kind of boring. From the Turn of a Card isn't really a Yes song to me at all, with just Benoit David singing and Oliver Wakeman on piano. Again, the vocals are weird. Benoit David almost sounds more like he's trying to imitate Freddie Mercury than Jon Anderson, as usual. And the sprawling 10-minute The Gift of Love actually does sound like Yes, but it's the plodding, uninspired 2000s Yes, not the energetic 1970s Yes. Ultimately, should this so-called mini LP have been released? I think maybe To the Moment should have been included on Fly From Here instead of one of the weaker tracks on that album, and the rest of this should have just stayed in the vault. But let's be honest, Jeff Downes was back in the band for Fly From Here. That's the reason none of this material was on it, because everything on From a Page was composed by Oliver Wakeman. Well, I think I've already spent more time talking about From a Page than I ever have listening to it, so let's move on. Number 23, Heaven and Earth, 2014. For me, this is the worst Yes album, and it's not even close. It's honestly the worst album by any artist that I've ever paid for. I think I literally threw away the CD because I didn't want to own it, and I knew no one would want to buy it from me or even accept it as a gift. I've never even been able to get through an entire song, much less the whole album, although I've listened to enough bits of each song to know that I don't want to hear any more. One of the greatest tragedies of Yes is that this was the last album project Chris Squire was a part of. He deserved better. Well, there you have it, my ranking of every Yes album from best to worst. But I don't want to end on a downer, so let's look at their album covers from worst to best. I'm not going to give any commentary here, just my personal rankings, and let the art speak for itself. Unfortunately, since I'm only considering their studio albums, we're missing a couple of my favorite Roger Dean covers. Yes Shows and Classic Yes. But fortunately, that also means ignoring no less than 10 of those late-era phoned-in covers. Okay, here's my list of Yes album covers ranked worst to best. Number 23, Magnification. Number 22, Talk. Number 21, Open Your Eyes. Number 20, Going for the One. Number 19, Big Generator. Here we get into that long string of phoned-in late-era Roger Dean covers, and it's a six-way tie. Union, From a Page, Heaven and Earth, Fly From Here, The Quest, and Keys to Ascension. Wait, maybe that's a seven-way tie. Number 12, The Ladder, only because, like the band, Roger Dean seemed to care a little bit about this one. Number 11, Tornado. Number 10, Time and a Word. Number 9, The Yes Album. Number 8, Close to the Edge. It may be their best album, but it's not their best cover. The version behind me would rank much higher. Number 7, 90125. Number 6, Yes. Number 5, Mirror to the Sky. Number 4, Drama. Number 3, Fragile. Number 2, Tales from Topographic Oceans. Number 1, Relayer. Second best album, best cover art, and it's not even close. Now that's a nice way to end this video. If you enjoyed it, please hit like and subscribe. If you think I suck, let me know down in the comments. What am I saying? Of course you're going to let me know down in the comments. Either way, thanks for watching.